AI is going to have to take over all human labor if it's going to survive financially. That's a really, really, really bold, unsettling claim that Geoffrey Hinton has made recently. He's the godfather of AI, and I may be getting the exact wording of that quote not quite right, so don't hold me accountable there, but this is something he recently said. And he's not entirely wrong in what he said, but he's also not entirely right. And that may sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but hopefully by the end of this, you're going to understand what I mean by that. And what I mean is there's a difference between perceived inevitability or a path that we are heading towards and accepting that as an inevitability and saying, well, this is just what we're going to do. And you walk that path knowing where you're going. And that's where we are right now. Now, I'm Christopher Lind, and this is Future Focused. And today, as we dig into the intersection of business, tech, and people, I really want to explore this further and talk about this system that we have created for ourselves that is largely problematic, especially for the humans who are listening to this right now, and what we do about it. Now, I promise, like usual, it's not going to be anti-AI, but it's also not going to be caution to the wind, throw everything into AI, because I think it's about threading the needle well. And I think it's absolutely a path that we can walk, but if we're not careful, we're going to end up walking this inevitability path that Geoffrey Hinton lays out. Now, before we get started, if you value content like this, if you like the content I'm creating, it would mean the world to me if you liked it, if you aren't following or subscribing to it already, if you would do that. And if, as we're listening, you're listening through this, you go, hey, you know what? I know somebody who would benefit from this. Please share it with them. It just really helps this get out there and hopefully help people navigate this wild world we're living in. And if you feel so compelled and you go, Christopher, if I could, I would love to buy you lunch. Well, I got news for you. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/Christopher Lind, and you can do that. You can say, thanks, Christopher. If I could, I would buy you lunch. So here's the next best thing. Okay, so let me talk a little bit more about this dependency paradox that we're in right now that we've largely created for ourselves. And what I mean by that is, so we already have some real challenges for people in general, or at least the broad-based population, with the capitalistic society that we're living in. And by no means, don't get all angry in the comments and say you're anti-capitalist. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the system itself, at least the way we're modeling it, is in some ways problematic for people in that we have this just relentless pursuit of more. We need to make more. We need to do more. We need to achieve more. There's just no end in sight for where we're going. And we could sit and debate all day long about whether that's good or bad, or what tweaks we need to make. That's not the point of this. It's just that it's the world we're living in. Stack on top of that now, we've added AI to this system, but it's not necessarily, at least at this point, something that's just seamlessly integrating into that system. In some ways it is, but it's also in some ways competing against that capitalistic system. And what I mean by that is, if you look at this race towards artificial general intelligence, AGI, artificial superintelligence, ASI, having the latest and greatest model, the AI arms race we're in, there's this just relentless pursuit of something. And whatever that something is, it's bigger and better than whatever it is we have now, which is, in my opinion, all poorly defined. We don't really even know where we're going, but we're running as hard as we can. And so we've got this capitalist system running as hard and fast as we can. And we got this AI system now running as fast and hard as they can. And there's a huge problem with these two in that humans, both of these systems feed off the same resources. The fuel sources are the same, and it's people. Companies can't run without people, no matter how autonomous they get. No matter, it still is fueled by people. Not only does it build on people, but the consumers are people, which then feed back into building the product. Right? It's the inherent fuel source. And the thing is, AI is the same way. As much as we like to think of AI as this alien intelligence, this autonomous entity that's beyond humans, it's not. It can't survive without people. In many ways, it's parasitic on us. That's why these AI companies need us to generate more content. That's why they want to get cameras and online AI systems on us at all times. They want it embedded into everything because they know these AIs in this relentless pursuit of whatever requires us, which is putting a huge, huge, huge strain on us. So when you think about it, when Hinton's talking about this and describing the direction that AI has to consume all human labor, it's because of this iron triangle in some ways of, well, there's the capitalistic pursuit over here, there's AI, the pursuit over here, and then there's humans underneath. And it's kind of ignoring that and saying, well, it just needs to eat that up because that's the only place it can go. It knows it's the fuel source. And it says, well, I got to get this out of the capitalistic system, which means I got to eat the people the capitalistic system takes out. And in the end, the whole thing is going to collapse if we're not careful, because we can't sustain this. And so even his own projection of the only way AI survives is by taking all of human labor. I understand the logic. I understand the reason. And I think in some ways what he's saying is this is the persistent belief. And maybe in some ways, I don't know Geoffrey personally, but maybe in his own ways, he's like, well, I just don't see another way. It has to consume humans. But then in the end, that's only a short-term solution. In the end, that ends up, you end up scraping the earth till there's no earth left to scrape. And then the whole thing falls in on itself. And so when I say it's an inevitability, I think, yes, the path we're on, it certainly looks that way. It absolutely looks that way. But we don't have to accept that as the only possible destination or the only possible path we take. And that's where I diverge from what Geoffrey says, because I would say, yes, you're right. That is absolutely a course we could take. It is absolutely a course we seem to be largely set on pursuing, but it doesn't have to be that way. And so today I want to talk about 3 rather counterintuitive things that I think actually offer us a different pathway and a better pathway, a more sustainable pathway where everyone wins, where AI wins, where the capitalistic society wins, where humans win in the end. And so I want to talk through those 3 and give some real practical cases for that and things that you can hopefully walk away from and go, you know what, I get, yeah, you know what, let's work together to take a different path. So let's talk about these. The first one I think is becoming more generally accepted. You'll get the head nods. People will nod. I don't know that we're really at a point where we're actually nodding with our feet, where we're actually taking action on this, but we're getting there. We're making some progress. And this is being surgical in your demands for AI. And when I say this, I mean discernment around AI is becoming a clear leadership advantage. You know, the folks that are thinking critically and being discerning about this are the ones who are winning right now when it comes to AI. And what I'm trying to push back against with this idea of, you know, being surgical is to move away from this pray and spray with AI. Like, just let's throw AI at absolutely everything, everywhere, and let's hope it grows. And it's not just because I'll talk about the counter argument here in a minute, because I get the counter arguments and people argue with me on this at times. But it's this idea that when we do that, we're actually fueling both of those systems that are competing for people. We're fueling this idea that nothing is ever enough and that AI will never be good enough. So we have to keep chasing it. And as a result, it fuels both the AI industry and the economic industry to just keep going at all costs and actually lose sight of the people that it actually feeds off of, that it actually needs to survive. And so when we don't do this, when we're not discerning, we are actually fueling the 2 systems that are actually our greatest threats. Now, the counter argument, the thing that people at times will push back on me is they will say, well, yeah, but here's the thing. won't we miss out? Like by not experimenting, by not trying things, by not, throwing AI in different areas, won't we miss out on opportunity? And my pushback on that is that's gambler's logic. Okay, that just because you go to a casino and put bets on every table does not increase your odds of winning. I mean, maybe it increases, well, it doesn't increase your odds. You might win more, but you also lose exponentially more, vastly counterbalancing any wins that you get. And you end up walking out empty handed with your chips. And so I understand, and there is so much fuel being poured on this FOMO of like, you just try everything. AI is changing so fast. There's so many things you could do. Just go with it and see what happens. But you actually are burning through your chips so much faster on this promise that maybe something will work. And unfortunately, if you know anything about gambling addiction, these little tiny hits that you get that may actually not be adding any value are actually going to fuel your FOMO and keep you putting more bets down, ultimately depleting your resources even faster. And so when I say being surgical, I'm simply saying, like, I'm not saying don't innovate. I'm not saying don't take risks. I'm saying being very intentional. Being surgical isn't about being slow or refusing to try new things. Not at all. It's about being smart and not just chasing everything, but designing with intention. And I'll give an example of this. I was with an organization, doing some work with an organization. They were really determined to streamline performance reviews. They firmly believed that managers doing performance reviews would improve overall leadership quality, overall performance of the organization. And so as a result, there was kind of this push to just say, like, let's throw AI at every single thing and see if we can't get more performance reviews. And unfortunately, one of the areas that there was a lot of pressure, we ultimately pulled it back, was like, hey, we can actually automate performance reviews. We can have AI not only write the performance review, but rather than the manager spending one-on-one time with it, we can actually have AI deliver the performance review in the manager's voice. And I know that might sound like something out of a dystopian nightmare, but it was something that people were really considering until we really pushed back on the fact that part of what makes a performance review effective is the connection between a manager and their direct report, and the trust that's built through that, the relationship that's strengthened through that, all this stuff. And when you automate all of that, you actually lose the very value of a performance review. So while you may get more, it's actually less effective overall. And so we were able to reel that back. But that required being really surgical and having difficult conversations and being able to lean into this. And so if you're walking away from this going, okay, but what does it mean to be surgical? I think there's a few things that everybody should be considering right now. One being, like, if you have AI projects going on, you should be looking at them and going, like, do we know why we're pursuing this? Have we mapped out like how we're going to measure success? Do we even know what's on the other end and what we're going to do with whatever we think we're freeing up or we're getting in return? Or are we just doing this because AI, because speed, because more, which is really what happened with this performance. We need more performance reviews. Well, a critical analysis revealed we actually need more than just more performance reviews. And I think that goes back to why you need to define clear outcomes. And actually, and here's another one, like, as you go through this audit, like, there are projects you might need to say, we need to stop. This isn't adding value. And that's exactly what I did with this client, was say, look, this whole like automating the performance review itself, let's kill it. Well, we've already gone down this path. We're already investing. No, we just need to stop, because not only are we fueling these systems, but we're actually not adding any value and causing real harm in the process. And that also leads this point of like going back to like knowing, hey, when did we achieve our goal with this? And it doesn't mean at some point you won't revisit it or come back to it, but you need to say, here's when we're done with this, which can be really hard as you think about the surgical outcomes. There can be, again, this FOMO of like, well, what if we just did more? What if we expanded the next thing? And that's how projects drag on and never get anywhere for years. So I think those are just some of the things that when you're thinking about surgery with AI, everybody needs to be doing right now as you step forward. And if you need help with this is the kind of work I do, like, let me know. I'm happy to, because being surgical in your AI is actually what's going to protect you from chaos, you as a person. And that doesn't matter whether you're a senior leader, a frontline, middleman, like, it doesn't matter. Being surgical protects all of us, and not protecting us for the sake of protecting us, but so that we can continue to grow, which gets to the next one that I think maybe a little more provocative would be the way that I would put it. So hear me out. And it's this idea that we need to have ceilings. I just said there needs to be a point where you say, we're done. We have achieved the outcome we set out to do. And when I say that, people often push back because they hear ceilings as limits. And they say, so you're saying what? We just stop? We move into complacency mode after we hit a certain limit? And my response to that is always, no, I'm not talking about stopping. I'm saying reaching that point is a signal point, and say, okay, if we go beyond this, we're no longer growing. We're just extracting and squeezing blood from a turnip. And sure, I mean, look at how many natural resources or things around the world, or stupid mistakes we've made in human history, where we see growth as, hey, if we just keep scraping more of this, we'll have more to sell. We'll continue growing as a company. And that works until you've scorched the earth and there's nothing left. And you go, oops, like, well, now what? Now we got to move on to something else. And unfortunately, that's the trajectory we're on. That's the trajectory Geoffrey is pointing at. And there's opportunity for us to set ceilings that don't stop growth, but force us to change the direction of growth, or to think differently about growth. And there's just even practical examples you can think about. I mean, if a tree only keeps growing up, eventually it falls over. If an invasive species comes into an ecosystem, pretty soon it dies out too, because it kills out all of its food sources and all of the things that support it. And that's just the way things go when we don't actually establish ceilings and say, hey, we've hit the boundary of where we need to go. And what it does is it doesn't stop growth, but it redefines it. It forces us to evolve the way we think about growth and the way we pursue growth. Now, here's a perfect example of this that I have done historically throughout my career journey. And if you've been responsible for budgets in a company, you're familiar with the usual drumbeat of every year. When budget season comes, you just stack on top of what your budget was something a little bit more. You need more money. You need more resources. You need additional headcount and additional resources. You may not even have defined for what yet. You just know you need to ask for it because it's probably going to get trimmed. And so you'll have to do this later. And this was an area that I always have cut against the grain. I've never operated as budgets as a zero-sum game, but something that we work together on. And there have been many times where I've had open headcount that I have shifted to another group, or I've had additional budget dollars that at the end of the year, I've said, I'm actually going to take my budget down and I'd like to see it moved over here. And that may sound like madness, but what it's actually done is it's created an ecosystem where things begin to thrive. And yes, at first it's very difficult because it takes a little bit for other people to stop doing their own just scraping the earth tactics, because they'll just scrape your earth up and then just keep scraping. But over time, people start to see, hey, this is actually having an effect, and this is actually starting to change things. And soon enough, you start reinvesting, you start thinking differently, you start saying, hey, sometimes I've maybe hit this ceiling, so I'm going to reallocate, or I'm going to move things around so that we can grow in new and different areas. And some real practical things that all of us can be doing in this age where everything says just keep running, keep scraping, keep burning, like keep hoarding. You can actually run an enough audit and actually look at, all right, if we were to get to this level of growth, or if we got to this point just based on even the environment that we're in, because there are certain limitations to what you can even do in a system. You can do that, and you can say, if we actually got to this, anything beyond this is just noise. It's just activity, or it's just stuff that maybe it makes us feel better. Maybe we can throw it into our what we accomplished by year end. But if we really said, did it add value to the system, we wouldn't be able to pass the red phase test on that. And that requires objectivity, and it requires a willingness to say more isn't always better. And actually locking in and digging into, where do those diminishing return projects and initiatives lie? Where do they sit? And where do we say, we could throw more resources at this, we could do more here, but it's not going to add overall value to the system. And then what do we do with that overflow? What do we do with what we have that we don't need? And like I said, I was used to be in teams where I would move money over to different groups and say, you have this need. And we'd have open discussions about, I've achieved as much as I can. I could ask for more headcount. I could do this. But if I did, we would just be producing more noise in the system. And so what I'd rather do is, I know these things are really important to the organization right now. And so I'm actually going to shift this over here. But that requires actually knowing where your ceilings are, which requires stopping and sometimes pruning, and not seeing pruning as failure, and not seeing, you know what, we don't need this anymore. This is an excessive thing. I would do a system audits of the tools and the systems we had on an annual basis, and actually force my teams to look at it and go, do we actually still use this? Is it adding value, or should we take that out of the system and reapply it somewhere else? Sometimes it meant giving it to somebody else. Sometimes it just meant repurposing it within my own organization. And it allows you to say, like, what if we weren't afraid of looking smaller? Or what could we stop doing, and what would that allow us to do? So often we're looking to put more on our plate, or to add more and accomplish more. And we don't think about the fact that that's actually preventing us from focusing on things that matter. And so once you hit those, if you don't know where those ceilings are, and like I said, establishing ceilings does not mean you never raise the ceiling again. Okay, so I want to be really clear with that. Establishing ceilings, or if you listen to my Red Lines episode a couple of weeks ago, it doesn't mean you never go past it. It means that when you get to that point, you critically examine it and say, what's next? Is what's next raising the ceiling or readjusting the red line? Or is what's next actually shifting focus to something that is actually going to drive real breakthrough? Because, when you look at this whole AI sphere that we're in right now, I'm not convinced the next phase of growth after the phase we're in right now is going to come from more tech or more advanced AI. I think it's actually going to come from more people, and more people who are adding value to a sustainable system, which actually brings me to my third point, which, again, on paper, it might get some head nods. I think in general, even right now, it feels a little bit provocative, but we've been here, and that is to invest in people, which I will say right now cuts against the cultural grain. Right now, it is, we need to invest everything in AI, and that is our only hope. And that goes back to what my original point was before, which is AI has created this system of never-ending pursuit. There are no ceilings in the AI world. It is progress and pursuit at any cost. And that's a problem. And so this is going to cut against the grain of where we are, because investing in people means putting a ceiling on tech. And that's not saying we're killing tech, we're ending tech. It's acknowledging the survival of AI is dependent on people. And so if the strategy for AI is to consume everything people do and take all that up, it's actually counterintuitive to AI progress. And that's actually what makes this whole approach a counter move culturally right now, because it's counterintuitive to reinvest, to say we're maybe going to slow down on the capitalistic pursuit. We're going to slow down on the technological pursuit, and we're actually going to take those resources. We're going to reinvest it in our people, but not just charity, doing it strategically. And I'm not saying don't ever do charity, but I'm saying it doesn't just have to be philanthropy and charity. It can be strategic investment in future growth. Going back to that, recognizing, hey, if we keep investing in the tree growing, it's going to topple over and the whole thing's going to die. Maybe we need to invest in root structure or fertilizer or whatever it is. We need to come up with something different. And I get this is where people will push back and they go, people are messy, they're unpredictable, they're expensive, we can't control them, all these other things. But if you listen to my podcast last week, I'm like, exactly. That is exactly why you need to fight against this just rush to invest in the endless pursuit of tech and profits and say, we actually need to invest in people to advance the tech and the profits. Because that unpredictability, that messiness is where innovation lies. The expense that you're reinvesting in people, that's not cost. That's not sunk cost. That's actually reinvestment in your future growth and the future advancement of the technology. Because machines can scale process. They can scale process like we've never seen before. And we're seeing that right now. Machines can absolutely amplify whatever they touch to levels beyond what any human can. But that can be good or really bad. And one thing it can't do is scale possibility. And humans are the only thing that can scale possibility, which if we completely stop reinvesting in them, we are literally cannibalizing the fuel source of the very things we say we're trying to achieve. Now, as a practical example, because I get people that go, well, like what? Where does that, what do we just keep giving people raises? Like, yes, okay, that's part of it. Sure. But I'll give you an example. I was with one organization doing some advisory work. And one of the things that we saw was we wanted to do an investment in people, but again, a strategic one. Yes, we can give people raises. Now it's a good thing. And it was something we also advocated for, but we also said, hey, what might be something that also creates and fuels new growth? Yes, we want to retain what we have, which is where raises can come into play, but we want to fuel new growth. We want to fuel innovation. And so what we did was we actually set up an internal gig system that incentivized, actually financially rewarded employees for investing more of their time into cross-functional teams and innovation projects, which actually served as almost this little internal incubator, this almost new fuel cell that we were creating that at the same time maintained these ultimate high standards of performance, because you couldn't participate in these things. You couldn't survive in the system, because that's the pushback to these kinds of things. Well, if we have people working on these incubator projects, then they're not doing their real job. No, there's safeguards you can put in place to help keep people maintained on high performance in the job they've been hired to do, while also saying we recognize you have additional skills and capacity that we can utilize to fuel further growth within the organization. And we want to reward you for that. And people participated. And it was a wonderful, wonderful thing that led to some spinoffs of the company, companies starting investing. They basically were investing in startups, internal startups that grew into their own organizations that were now helping fund and diversify the portfolio of the organization. Some of it just led to greater efficiency in the organization by utilizing the resources that people already had at a much lower cost than had they hired new headcount or brought in external resources. So that this wasn't necessarily saying, oh, we're investing in these people. It's just a net loss to our organization. It actually was fueling growth in ways their profits and their performance went up overall. Now we're just adding technology into the mix, which, if we look at the trajectory of technology, which is AI continues to amplify everything we do. If I had this level of success that I have now, or that I had on that pre-AI, imagine the level of success we would have seen with AI. And so in this sense, think bigger than just, well, what do you mean invest in people? What, buy a subscription to LinkedIn Learn? I mean, maybe, raise people's salaries. Well, if you haven't been keeping them up with inflation, yeah, you should do that too. But there are other creative things like incubators, like actual reskilling, not just throwing training at people, but actually saying, hey, we're making a strategic investment in people with certain skills we know we're going to need based on where we're going, based on projects that we need. There are specific things we're bringing people in. The next generation, we look at this stuff now where it's like, oh, well, we're going to replace young talent with AI agents. Well, I can tell you right now, based on the research I talked about last week, those agents are not even competing with the freshest, greenest talent. But that's not sustainable because that green talent grows into full-blown redwood trees, right? And so if you don't make that investment on the front end, you're actually eating away at your future by doing that. I think the other thing is that, I see organizations where they've made strategic investments in investing in their employees' support systems so that people weren't coming to work wondering or stressing out about how their support system was going to survive, and they could focus 100% of their attention on their work. And so there are really creative ways to say, maybe just instead of achieving more, stripping more out of the earth, we actually say, what are things we can take and that we can reinvest in sustainable solutions? And I would actually argue that's the stronger, longer term play, because when people thrive, the overall system stabilizes. And right now we are absolutely on trajectory to destabilization. And Geoffrey Hinton saying the path forward is AI has to take over all human labor. That is extreme instability. And I hope at this point I've made the case that it's instability that will ultimately lead to a total collapse. So I hope I've convinced you, because Hinton's not wrong about his trajectory. And so hopefully you see what I mean when I say he's not wrong, but he's also not right. Because the direction we're on does not have to be our destiny. We actually have an opportunity to change course, to make conscious decisions about where we're going, and to move from an extractive system that's just extracting everything out of everything it touches into a regenerative system, something that regenerates and grows into something better. And so, as you finish listening to this, I would encourage you just to ask objectively, like, hey, where am I using AI out of fear, not focus? Or where am I just throwing it for comfort rather than focus? Am I just chasing growth without really asking the question, like, is this actually adding long-term value? Is it adding any value at all? There's a lot of stuff that's not even adding short-term value. And are you treating humans, which are the fuel source for your capitalistic system and your technology innovation? Both of those are 100% dependent on people. And are you treating them like that precious, depletable resource that they are? Or are you just running and saying, we'll just squeeze it till it's gone? And hopefully by that point, I don't know what people are banking on happens once that fuel source is burned up. Based on the number of apocalypse bunkers people are buying, I have a pretty good idea of where people are going. But I recognize this is a lot. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to process. I know every single episode I put in, even mentally, it depletes me sometimes to sit and think through all these things. But I love doing this work. And so if listening to this convinces you and you go, boy, I agree, I want to do some of these things, I'm not sure where, I need help with this. This is why I create the content I create. And I hope you find it helpful in achieving these things and pursuing these paths. But I can promise you, content will only take you so far. Having spent my entire life in the sphere of human development, more knowledge will only get you so far. More content will only take you to a certain level. There is a ceiling, going back to point 2, there is a ceiling at which more content will not get you where you need to go. And that's absolutely why I do the consulting, coaching, and advising work I do. So if this is an area you need help with, go to my website, check out what I do, grab a time on my calendar, and we can have a conversation about how you build a sustainable source and system that'll be there for you in the long term. So just remember, as you're kind of thinking about this, just please remember, AI cannot survive without people. It cannot. But the way we're building it, the trajectory we're on right now, we absolutely are trying to. So be surgical in what you're doing, set ceilings, and really focus and invest in people. because I promise you that growing through people is not just blind idealism. It's really the only kind of growth that lasts. With that, we'll see you on the other side.